Good morning, everyone. My name is Devi Palanivelu, and I'm from the Department of Public Information. We are pleased to have you joining us today. Today we have Ms. Daniela Bass, the Director of the Division of Social Policy and Development, and Ms. Marta Roig, a Senior Social Affairs Officer, both from the Department of Economic and Social Affairs, who will brief on the 2016 report on the world's social situation, which was launched today. The report is entitled, Leaving No One Behind, the Imperative of Inclusive Development, which focuses on the need for social inclusion and examines the social, economic, and political disadvantages that some groups in the society face today. Copies of the report, as well as the press release, is available by the door. You should have also received them by email. We will first hear from Ms. Bass, as well as Ms. Roig, before we take questions.
Thank you. Good morning. I would like, before talking about the flagship, I would like to thank those who have been working very hard to make this flagship so interesting. And I would like, therefore, to thank the chief of the branch dealing with development and research and intergovernmental processes, that is Mrs. Wenyang Yang, and definitely Marta Roig, who is the leading author, I would say, of this flagship, besides all the remaining staff that I'm not going to mention here, but it has been really a teamwork, and it shows. It shows by the content that you will find in this flagship. It's really amazing how we managed, with the support of experts, to tackle a very important and sensitive issue, such as the one of inclusion. And yet, we have been able, I do hope so, to stimulate a debate that will follow after having read this flagship, without trying to give answers. But actually, we have asked ourselves lots of questions, and these questions, we do hope, will trigger the dialogue. Now, when it comes to inclusion, we know that with the new agenda, the 2030 agenda and other agendas, the Addis Ababa agenda, etc., the issue of leaving no one behind has become critical in a world that is dramatically changing in some ways, and on the other hand is acknowledging how important it is for everybody to participate in the quality of life that we want to have. So the role of development, for it to be sustainable, for it to be accessible, for it to be inclusive, and indeed reduce the gap of inequalities, is key. And before explaining to you a few more things, I would like to highlight the fact that we noticed that some groups, such as persons with disabilities, specifically children with disabilities, for instance, who do not have access, many of them don't have access to education, or if we think of minority groups or ethnic groups that are often excluded, not included, into areas such as education, employment, they are underpaid, they are not even paid at times. So these social groups suffer of particular discrimination, and sometimes they suffer from double discrimination and more. So we have looked at all these aspects. We have analyzed them. We tried to understand who is being left behind and in what ways this can be avoided and why it is still happening. So again, why? A question. I would like then the author and the leading author of this book to go a little bit more into detail in what we have analyzed, but definitely leaving no one behind and promoting social inclusion are not simple goals. And we have learned that the focus on poverty and the lack of employment and decent work and the policy implications that this has in keeping societies in peace is enormous. We also have learned that there are some key areas, such as social protection and education, that really need to have stronger social policy frameworks at national level. And allow me to share with you something that I found extremely interesting. Here, as you might see, I'm sorry, but I don't have a larger copy of this. We have a representation of what exclusion is. You see, in the circle, there are people, but outside the circle, there are the social groups I'm talking about, persons with disabilities, often youth, older persons, indigenous peoples, and as an issue, though it's not a social group, the family. Many families are excluded by and not included in communities for various factors. And then, if you look at the next picture, you see what segregation means. And again, that's not inclusion. Segregation is when you have a group where an area where all groups considered to be not acceptable for whatever reasons, where there are prejudices, etc., are caged, I would say. And then we move to integration. So what you see here is that this group definitely is integrated among the others, but here it's included. This is inclusion. This is what this report is talking about. So, if you allow me now, I would like to ask Mrs. Roig to go into detail about the content of the report. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Daniela. I think the summary Daniela provided is very comprehensive. The drawing perfectly represents the conceptual approach that we have taken in the report. Maybe I would just add that, as Daniela said also, leaving no one behind and social inclusion are very complex goals. For once, social exclusion has many dimensions. People can be excluded from social life, they can be excluded from economic life, they can be excluded from political life. And the relevance of each domain and the ways in which people are excluded and the groups that are excluded depend on context, depend on what country they live in, depend on what kind of situation they are in. So I would not go too much into the analysis of the report because probably there will be questions about it and there's probably no time to present it. Maybe just to say that in the report, we do not say that being excluded from education alone, for example, or from employment alone, or from each of these things represents exclusion. What we find is that there are certain groups of the population that experience disadvantage systematically in each of these domains. It is this accumulation of disadvantage that we equate with exclusion. Having said that, I mean, the report obviously also says that there is not one single policy that works in all contexts to address inclusion and to leave no one behind. We present some policy principles maybe that should apply to all countries, but I think we'll be glad to respond to questions in this regard instead of preempting them.
Ms. Wu, do you have anything to add?
No, I just want to compliment what Daniela and Marta has said. Okay, the mic is on now. I just want to reiterate that indeed the report finds that whether a person, community, or a group, a social group, how they fare in many measures of well-being depends on their the distinctions, the social distinctions that separate people and communities into what we see unequal groups. Depends on their gender, depends on where they live, not only which country they live, but within a country, whether they live in rural areas or urban areas, depends on their status of disability, ability, and depends on their ethnic origins. So all those factors that are beyond the control of people and also do not, we emphasize, do not reflect their skills or their abilities, their natural abilities. So those factors are determinants of the status of people and whether they are included or excluded. So that this is, that we, in other words, they are structural barriers, and there are underlying structural factors that cause social exclusion. Therefore, that there indeed policies and institutions can address those elements to attack the underlying structural causes of social exclusion. And I think that's if there are two messages that we try to get out in this book, is that one is that there is exclusion, and two, policies and institutions matter and they can make a difference. And that's what we call for in the report.
Thank you very much. Do you have any before we wrap up? Okay.
I would have a question.
Absolutely.
Thank you. I would have a question. If I can address the audience and ask the audience questions.
Certainly.
If I may ask maybe the lady sitting there, if you can introduce yourself or just ask me, just reply to the question. Yes. Well, I do not know if you had already a chance to glance at the report, but I would like to know if before going through this report, you had a different idea of what inclusion and exclusion is, and if by reading this report, this flagship, your idea has improved, changed, or stereotypes or misunderstandings have been somehow overcome.
Thank you for the question. Is that right? Okay, thank you. Thank you for the question. I think that one thing that definitely reinforced for me in the report is how difficult conceptualizing and actually trying to measure these issues are. So for me, I think I had general notions of inclusion and exclusion and what that meant in society and particularly in my national context. But when actually trying to look at indicators or measures of how to come up with what we mean when we say exclusion and what we mean when we say inclusion are quite difficult. So I appreciate that exercise in terms of going through the different ways in which you can measure it and also the differences. I think I also appreciate a focus on discrimination and the role that discrimination has in perpetuating exclusion. And discrimination can there's certain facets of discrimination that we think of, but that the report does do a good job of going through all the different forms in which discrimination can manifest itself and perpetuate exclusion.
Thank you. I have a question then for the gentleman down there. Yes. No, don't avoid. Look at me. Not you, the gentleman next to you, who is holding a hand in front of his mouth. That gentleman. Yes. Can you tell us, from your viewpoint, if inclusion and exclusion are ways that trigger or solve poverty? Yes. Yes, you.
There's a mic. Thank you for the question. Obviously, I think from our perspective, exclusion does have a major impact on poverty. So as we try to eradicate poverty in all its forms and dimensions, including extreme poverty, it is imperative that greater focus should focus on tackling exclusion. The people that we try to reach first, those left behind, the furthest, deserve to be included. Without that, then it's pretty much difficult for the global community to eradicate poverty in all its forms.
Thank you very much for that. Before we wrap up the press conference, unless there are any other questions from the audience, I would like to ask a question before we wrap up, if you don't mind. Given that you have gathered quite a lot of data in this report and you are aware of the current situation today, can you perhaps each tell us, is this something that we can improve and progress, by 2030?
If we make sure that policies in general, economic, social, for the environment, culture, are thought in such a way that they really assure the participation of everybody. That is the participation of all ages. This will assure that no one is left behind, and therefore it will assure that everybody is included in all aspects of life. This is what I'd like to say. And I would like, before giving the mic to my colleagues, I would like to say that I asked these questions to the audience because this is the spirit of the report, to stimulate discussions. Thanks.
Thank you. Would you like something to add?
Yes, I can add something. I mean, obviously, leaving no one behind is a long-term goal. It's an aspirational goal. By 2030, nobody expects that we will have made progress in leaving no one behind, but there will be people still left behind. I mean, again, this is a very multidimensional concept, so there are many ways of leaving people behind. However, we have to put, this is, again, a long-term goal. There has been already a lot of progress. We have made impressive progress in reducing poverty. People are more educated than ever before. People are better connected than ever before. So it's a long-term trend of progress. But I would also like to say one thing, as we make progress towards leaving no one behind and including everyone, we have to make sure that everyone is prepared to include everyone else, that tolerance is promoted, that people are, informed enough to understand that inclusion is in everyone's benefits. Otherwise, we can see, and we are seeing some backlashes.
Thank you for this excellent question. I just want to add to what my colleague had already said, is that you said that, what can we expect, what we can improve. I would like to emphasize the area of policy coherence and policy coordination that indeed can be improved. And I think that this report, and to very much the spirit of the 2030 agenda, is about multi-dimensions of poverty, multi-dimensions of development process, so that to achieve this leave no one behind, this is central pledge of the 2030 agenda, we need economic, social, environmental policies to work hand in hand, to work together, and we have to improve in the way we formulate and carry out policies, so that it's no longer business as usual. This is also kind of a cliche, but the more conventional approach of different areas deal with their challenges. But we need an integrated approach to policy, to implementation, so that all the aspects, all the dimensions of our challenge will be not necessarily tackled simultaneously together, but the policies will be talking to each other to make sure that they complement each other and to leverage on synergies among the various policies, so that we can improve policy formulation, delivery, and implementation to achieve greater impact of policies.
Thank you very much. On that note, we will be ending the press conference. Thank you so much for joining us today to brief on the report, and thank you too.